All right, that moves us to our superintendent's report, so I will turn it over to Dr. Ross.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the school board and our community. We are so proud to have another opportunity to work in School District 5 to see our National Merit semifinalists representing the top 1% of students in the nation. You akin that to athletics, and those are superstars that we just honored tonight, and we're very proud of them. Representing what we do as a system, answering those three critical questions each day. That's why do we do this work, how do we accomplish this work, and then what are our outcomes. And it's meetings like this where we get feedback to make sure that we stay on course to that vision that we love and grow our students, our mission that we're focused on academic, social, emotional growth and development, and then that we are targeting our outcomes in our strategic plan. We have 4 goals with 26 strategies that align to school climate, teacher admin quality, student achievement, and our gifted and talented. We've marked this year as the growing season, an opportunity to celebrate growth and achievement, and we're very proud of the growth that we had. If you remember last year, if we looked at the fall measures of academic progress projections, you can see with SC Ready that by the fall, the number of students who were off grade level were indicated by red, and the students on grade level were indicated by blue, those blue bars in elementary and middle school. If you look at our work 1 year later, you'll see a noticeable change. In all categories except for one, we have more on-grade level students than off-grade level students. And that's a testament to the hard work of our teachers, our families, our students, and our administrators and their work. So yes, there's more to go, but we recognize the growth in this true growing season. And we're also working to grow our graduation report, our graduation rate. Our goal is to get over our 90% target this year, currently at 83 for the district cohort, working each day to make sure that we put names behind those numbers, but understand the stories behind those names so that we can make that impact. So we want to do some updates today. We're going to have updates on our graduation rate, our school report card, and our strategic plan implementation and progress monitoring. How do we make sure that 2,740 employees are all focused on that mission? It's through that strategic planning process. So if we look at our graduation rate since 2016, you can see how we've made increases, but we still hover around that 90%. So we're going to be working, we talk within our strategic plan and in our academic goal setting of ways that we have some innovative ways to come and break that 90% threshold. But we're very proud of the work that we're doing, for each of those graduating cohorts. Every year, we have an accountability report, and that accountability report just gives a report card of our school performance and our district performance. So here to bring a review of our school report card is Dr. Van Holden from the Office of Accountability. Dr. Holden.
Thank you, Dr. Ross and members of the school board. It's my pleasure to be with you tonight to talk about a couple of things, but the first one on the agenda there are the report card ratings from the recently issued 2023 school report cards. As an overview first of what goes into a school's report card rating, there are several different areas. We have academic achievement, college and career readiness, multilingual learners and their progress, graduation rate, preparing for success, school climate, and student progress. Now, some of those measures are specific to different levels. We'll talk more about that in just a second. But a school earns ratings in each of the areas I just mentioned. They get a rating in each area, and they get points in each area. And the points are then added up at the end of the process for a school's total number of points, overall points, and that is what determines the school's overall rating. One of the key notes before we get into what each category is worth, because even though we see this number of areas that constitutes the report card rating, not each one of these things is weighted the same. Some of them are significantly higher in weight than other categories. So what we're going to get into is, what are those weights? What goes into determining the overall rating? And the first caveat here is for multilingual learners' progress. Now, this is 10% of a school's overall rating, but it only applies when a school has 20 or more multilingual learners in the school. So again, 10% of the rating if the school has 20 or more multilingual learners. If the school has less than 20 multilingual learners, that 10% of points is going to get redistributed. We're going to see that on the next couple slides where we see where those point distributions occur, but you have to understand this part first, okay? And we do have several schools in the district that do not have 20 or more multilingual learners, and so their point allocation, point distribution is a little bit different than other schools in the district and other schools in the state because of that 10%. Now, the other common question we get here is it 10%? What if they have exactly 20 multilingual learners, and that is actually about 1% of the school's overall population? It still counts for 10%. This is not about a factor of the overall enrollment in a school. It counts for 10% as long as that school has 20 or more multilingual learners. So first, we're going to look at our model for accountability for kindergarten through 8th grade, which is our elementary, intermediate, and middle schools. And what you can see is when multilingual learners' progress is a factor, okay, so that's when we have 20 or more multilingual learners. The two most significant weights are the two on the end here. We have achievement on SC Ready and SC Alt, ELA, and Math. That counts for 35%. And then we have student progress on the far other side, which counts for 35%. That is also SC Ready, ELA, and Math, English Language Arts and Math. In other areas, we have 10% of the rating coming from SC Ready or SC Alt Science. Important to note, that's only administered in grades 4 and 6. We have multilingual learners' progress, and we have the teacher-student school climate survey. That counts for 10%. Now, the next question is, what happens when those 10% of points aren't present for multilingual learners' progress? And what we see there is that 10% gets redistributed to achievement on SC Ready and student progress on SC Ready. Okay, so those two go from being 35% of a school's overall rating to 40% of an overall rating each, so a total of 70 to 80% there. Now, with that, the other key thing to think about is when we talk about achievement, we're talking about grades 3 through 8. That's who takes SC Ready, grades 3 through 8. And we talk about student progress, we're only talking about grades 4 through 8, because student progress is measured by a student's growth on SC Ready from one year to the subsequent year. So the 2023 scores are being compared to a student's score in 2022. The other big note here, and this is not something we're going to go in detail about, but a lot of folks assume consistency on these metrics from year to year, that they're always the same. And this is actually not the case, especially for this year. There's going to be a major shift with the 2024 school report card. So the current year that we're in, the student progress measure is going to change dramatically from what it's been for the last several years. It's a new metric. We've been preparing for that internally for more than a year now. I think we're well ahead of the rest of the state in terms of understanding that metric. And the key part will come down to now acting on that and continuing to prepare our students and to grow our students in line with our mission, vision, and strategic plan. A note on student progress as it's currently configured, though. Again, the model is shifting. But currently, again, it counts for 35 to 40% of a school's overall rating. Half of the rating for student progress comes from the all students group. So every student in grades 4 through 8 who took the test 2 years in a row, enrolled continuously in the school. The other part that's a factor, though, that's half of the student progress rating is the students in the lowest quintile. So the students who entered the school year in the lowest 20%, okay, of their grade level on a specific test. So we look at the lowest 20% and we look at the all students group. Now, I will say the lowest 20% of students counts in the all students group. They count twice, okay? They count as the entire lowest quintile, and they count as 20% of that all students group, okay? The two measures there are averaged together, and that's how we get a student progress score. The next piece is the high school model, grades 9 through 12, and you can see there's several more factors here. We have college and career readiness, we have achievement On biology and U.S. history, we have the graduation rate, we have multilingual learners' progress again, we have the teacher-student school climate survey, and then last we have achievement on Algebra 1 and English 2. And I apologize here. At the bottom, we do have the box isn't going away, so I can briefly describe that for you. The 5% gets redistributed here, and it goes towards graduation rate, which increases from 25% to 30%, and then achievement also changes from 25 to 30%. So when we take away multilingual learners' progress, the graduation rate weighting goes up from 25 to 30%, and the achievement scores go from 25 to 30%. Now again, just like I said on the last one for student progress, we assume these metrics are the same year to year. They're not. The achievement scores in particular for high schools changed dramatically just this year. That's because of the way that the scores were previously calculated relied a lot on the class of, so the graduating class, that's whose EOC scores counted. And because many of them were missing scores from the 2020 school closure, EOC was not administered at that time, okay? There were many things that could not be factored in from that year in their graduating cohort of scores. The state switched the model for how the achievement scores are counted. I can certainly answer questions about that later. The other part that's going to change for 2024 is the state is adding a new metric called high school student success, which is going to factor in fifth year student success as well as on track to graduate in our earlier grade levels and earlier years of high school. Okay, so again, there's typically an assumption that these things stay the same, okay, but they don't. The model can change from year to year. The next few slides, after establishing that groundwork, are going to look at what were the results from last year and from this year. So first, you can see the state's overall rating distribution in 2022, and then we can see District 5's overall rating distribution in 2022. Okay, so you can see last year we had 22.7% of schools score excellent, and 18.18 score good, 45.45 scored an average rating, and then we had 13.64 or 3 schools score below average. We can then see the state's overall distribution of scores, overall ratings from 2023, and we can see the District 5 overall distribution. We can see that our number of excellent schools, our percentage of excellent schools held steady. We increased in the good category. We saw a 1 school decrease in average and a 1 school decrease in below average. And this is the distribution of those scores. So you can see a listing there of every school that scored excellent: Chapin High, Chapin Intermediate, Dutch Fork Middle, Lake Murray Elementary, Spring Hill. You can see the schools that scored good: Chapin Middle, Dutch Fork High, H.E. Corley, Irmo Elementary, Irmo Middle, and River Springs. You can see the schools that scored average, which would be Ballantyne, Dutch Fork Elementary, Harbison West, Irmo High, Leap Hart, Nursery Road, Oak Point Elementary, Piney Woods, Seven Oaks, and our schools that scored below average: Chapin Elementary and Crossroads. Now, with every year, we looked at that graph just now that showed kind of the distribution of scores across levels. You see, we saw an increase in the number of schools that scored good and a decrease in the other ones of average and below average, but there's often movement within that. So we had several schools that went up this year, including Chapin Intermediate, H.E. Corley, Irmo Elementary School, Leap Hart, Irmo Middle, and Irmo High. And we did have 2 schools whose overall rating fell, including Chapin Elementary and Chapin Middle. But we had a number of schools that increased during that time period as well. We can then break that down, and we can look at the overall ratings by level. So you can see the state's overall ratings: elementary, middle, and high, and what that distribution looked like. You can see District 5's overall distribution by elementary, middle, and high. You can see, of course, with the high school, we're looking at only 4 schools. Same thing with middle schools, only looking at 4 schools there. We sometimes get questions about that because it says that we have 4 schools at the middle level. That's because Chapin Intermediate School, for state accountability purposes, counts as an elementary school. Okay, so it's among this group of schools in that first column of District 5 scores. Okay. The other thing we can do is not just look at the overall level, but we can look at how that compares on each of the little areas that we talked about that make up the overall rating. So we can see first the state's distribution of scores on academic achievement. We could see the state's distribution of scores on school climate, on multilingual learners' progress, on preparing for success, on student progress, on graduation rate, and on college and career readiness. And then we can also compare that to the District 5 scores, okay? And you can see in areas such as student achievement and preparing for success, and graduation rate, and CCR. The district is noticeably above the state expectation or the state performance in those areas. And of course, we have areas such as student progress, which remain an area of focus for the district, similar to last year. Okay, we have several areas where we're doing well, and we've identified some that we're looking at for continued improvement as well. We could break that same data down by elementary, and here you can see the state's elementary performance, okay, compared to District 5's elementary performance. We could then look at middle level. And I'm not going to go through each of these graphs with you. They're there for informational purposes because I think in general, the district's overall data kind of tells the story of what's happening here. And then graduation rate, or high school, you can see it switches out student progress, and now we're looking at graduation rate and college and career readiness, okay? The important part to note here too, and I mentioned this earlier when we talked about the work we're doing here and the focus on student progress. Many of these areas that you just saw in the accountability manual are actually focuses, or areas of focus in our strategic plan. So for example, academic achievement, SC Ready, EOC scores, that's a major focus of our strategic plan and strategies 1 through 3, which we'll be talking about in a little bit. Preparing for success, which deals with our science and social studies scores, also in preparing for success. Also in our strategic plan under strategies 1 through 3 under student achievement. Multilingual learners progress actually has its own strategy in the strategic plan. Student progress, that's the goal of our student achievement section. A couple years ago when we adopted the new strategic plan, we made the decision to focus on student progress data as opposed to achievement data. We've got graduation rate data. We've got college and career readiness data in there as well. Those are both goals, but CCR, college and career readiness, again, pops up in some of the strategies as well. For school climate, the exact questions aren't always the same, but we are focused on the perceptions of our teachers and students in the school climate section, and many of the questions are overlapping and share an area of focus with our district's initiatives. And then for our teacher administrator quality section, we do look at, again, teacher perception data from those teacher surveys, the same measures, the same survey that is being used by the state for accountability purposes. Anytime you see survey on here, that's coming from the South Carolina Department of Education's School Climate Survey, which is the survey being used in the school report cards. In summary, for our school report card data, similar to 2022, District 5 schools in general received higher overall ratings in 2023 than other schools around the state. We performed a little bit better than the state expectation in many areas, and a lot in some other areas. Academic achievement, preparing for success, graduation rate, and CCR emerge as continued areas of celebration. And then areas like student progress remain our consistent focus because that's where we believe through our strategic plan and through our mission and our vision, that's where the focus needs to be. And that's where we're continuing to allocate our attention during professional development and during ongoing conversations with schools. And the other part I'd advocate or stress here is that our strategic plan is very much focused on these accountability measures. We've been very fortunate as our district as we've set these things up, as we've set up our plans for the next 5 years. We've been in conversations with state leaders. I know several of the folks over in our executive staff have been in those conversations. I've been in those conversations as we work to have shared conversations with state leaders about where we think these accountability models should head. And at the same time, we've been working on our strategic plan to make sure that we're all headed in the same direction there. So this time, I'll take any questions that we have about the school report card ratings. I'll turn it back over to Dr. Ross first, I guess.
Before we go to questions, this is something that I do want to make the board aware of. Pursuant to the South Carolina Code of Laws 59, 18, 16, 15, Section 5, Part A, an underperforming school is defined by a school receiving an overall school report card rating of below average or unsatisfactory. And because we have two schools in that, that does bring this board to action, not tonight, of course, but in November of improving a turnaround plan or a continuous improvement plan. So I want to ask at this time, before we move to questions, which we will field, that our Chief of Academics, Ms. Tina McCassell, just kind of outline what are the steps that we're taking as a district to bring forth a completed continuous improvement or turnaround plan for the November 13th meeting.
Sure. So members of my staff will be meeting with the schools this week and talking with them about their ideas of some strategies. Some of the money that we've put forth for them for professional development will be used towards some very strategic professional development for the schools that they see as a need for themselves. And then they will be writing a plan, we'll be supporting that, and we'll be bringing that plan to you at the November meeting. In between there, SICs, PTOs will be involved in looking at that plan. Community will be, we'll be communicating with them via letter so that they know what's happening and what types of supports will be in place for the school.
Sorry. Any questions?
Ms. Tuttle, I saw your hand up first.
Kind of to that whole point, have we looked at hiring additional math and reading interventionists at these schools? Because I know they tend to concentrate with the lower performing students. So it would seem like if you can help that 20%, not that you don't need to help across the board, but I'm wondering specifically those two positions in Crossroads and Chapin Elementary.
I'll go to Ms. McCaskill and Dr. Turner on the question of staff allocation and targeted interventions at the school level for that piece.
So we currently do have reading intervention in both places. We do not have math intervention in either of those two places at the moment. That would take board approval for FTEs because we don't currently have FTEs for that. There's just a lot of pieces and parts that can go into these plans. So sure, staff is always a positive, but there's also things that we can look at and do as a core curriculum standpoint as well.
Dr. Holden, I have a question regarding this student progress, excuse me, with the elementary school level and kind of how it ties into Crossroads as well. So the student progress is the growth for the between, like, say at Chapin Elementary between 3rd and 4th grade.
Yes.
So when you're looking at the report cards in the other clusters where you have K through 5, if there was the 5th grade at Chapin Elementary, would that impact the student report card? Because it seems to me it's interesting for me to see the Lake Murray numbers, the Pineywood numbers, and the Chapin Elementary School numbers, and then to look at Chapin Intermediate with 5th and 6th grade because they can see the growth between 5th grade and 6th grade, and Chapin Intermediate is an excellent. So I'm trying to put all of that together. If one would impact the other.
Well, I'll talk about the two schools. I think there is an impact. I don't know that it's necessarily what everybody might think it might be. And the key thing that I think about with it, and the two schools we're talking about here that are below average actually have the same thing in common, which was so much of that rating for student progress comes down to one grade level. So, for example, Chapin Elementary School is a school that serves students in pre-K through 4th grade. But if you think about that student progress model, as I mentioned earlier, it only counts for students in grades 4 through 8. So only grade 4, so that's 35 to 40% of the school's overall rating is going to count on student progress. If you were to add in grade 5, it adds in another grade level that can balance out that, and it takes away some of that single year fluctuation that you do see. And what we do see kind of consistently is when you have an accountability model like this one, and the high schools used to be the same way actually until this year, but when one cohort has such an outsized weight on the overall school report card rating, you can see single year fluctuations that are massive in a report card rating. And if you were to add in another grade level, it certainly takes some of the weight off of one grade level in particular. So in that case, you would see 4th and 5th grade. Now, is there a direct relationship between that grade level configuration and student progress? I don't know that I have the data to say that. I don't know that I could draw that conclusion yet. Maybe in a few more years, especially as we're changing the student progress model, maybe. But I think anytime you have one cohort of students driving that much of a school's overall rating, which at Chapin Elementary, the fourth grade can be, I think it's like we just did the math a few days ago, 75 to 80% of a school's overall report card rating. The high schools used to have the same issue because so much of it was coming down to that graduating class. Luckily, we're taking some measures now to distribute that across the other grade levels, but one cohort either way could dramatically swing a high school's report card rating in previous years. So my answer to that would be yes, because of single-year fluctuations in a specific cohort of students. And anytime you can have a better representation of the overall work occurring within a school, that's better than having one cohort, one grade level, be such a massive impact on the school's rating. So Chapin Intermediate, which you mentioned, of course, has two grade levels, fifth and sixth. Our middle schools have two, but Chapin Elementary, Piney Woods, Lake Murray, a heavy amount of their report card rating comes down to fourth grade. Now, we had a conversation, and Ms. McCaskill mentioned we're talking to various teams and meetings, and I had a great conversation with folks over at Chapin Elementary School the other day, and we talked about this exact issue. And they pointed out quite rightly that while they don't show up in the report card rating, the great work of our kindergarten through second grade teachers does have an impact, and pre-K teachers does have an impact because they're laying the groundwork for those academic achievement scores. And that is true. What I would love to see is a more direct impact but without increasing the amount of testing we have, because so much of that work is occurring but not being rewarded necessarily in the accountability model. And what we saw this year, in particular at Chapin Elementary, was one, and I can't say it's a specific cohort, that would certainly not be something I would be saying here, but we saw a massive fluctuation in their report card rating from one year to the next. And I can't help but think that single year thing, that single year issue, is playing a role because that one group is playing such an important role on their report card rating.
Mr. Scully.
Yeah, I think you just touched on what I was going to ask, but my question was, are the two that are in below average, is this their first dip into those waters below average, or have they been there previously? And then did we have any schools that were previously below average and on a CIP that kind of moved up and out of that successfully?
Yeah, Lee Park Elementary School moved up this year from below average to average. Crossroads, I believe, was there last year as well, so 2022 and 2023. And then this is Chapin Elementary School's first time at that level. I believe last year, if my notes are correct, they were good, so the second highest rating in 2022.
Kathy.
I think that Chapin it dropped from 41 to 39, if I'm not correct. So it was still at the bottom of that other. So I don't like to just dwell on the negative. So I did look at all these, and I noticed one thing that was, very exciting to me. I always think of our school district as the best school district in South Carolina. So I'm always looking at, what are the other ones doing too? But I know Fort Mill, for example, generally has pretty good report cards. We had a higher enrollment rate in 2- and 4-year colleges. We were at 81.2. They were at 73.6, and that's not insignificant. So I think that's really good. There were a couple areas that I saw, though, that I just want to point out that did kind of concern me. One, and this may seem like a little blip somewhere, but they actually report in there the students who are enrolled in health sciences, career, and technical education. And what I thought was really interesting is, and I realize these student populations are not exactly the same, but Lexington one had 1804, Fort Mill had 475, and we had 180. And I just would, I'm from that industry. I'm retired now, but I would just really encourage us to look more at health science careers in Kate. I think that would help us even more with that 2- and 4-year. There are a lot of jobs, really good jobs like dental hygienist, that you can prepare for and get in there in a not a 4-year program. The other thing I saw, and I just want to point this out too, is there's a question in there to teachers, and that is basically, are the rules for behavior enforced in your school? And we're almost 10 points less than some of the other school districts. Ours was 72.9, and another one, for example, is 82.7. I would just like to see us dig in more with our teachers and find out why they say that and what they think we can do to better enforce the behavior. Because having sat in some of these classes, that's a real distraction, right? Kids aren't learning when the teacher's distracted with a kid that's not behaving. So just kind of wanted to point those things out.
And I have one more question for you, Dr. Holden, and you may not have this answer right offhand, and I'm kind of comparing two different charts that we just had. Dr. Ross started the conversation with our focus on growth and the data that we have in student growth. And then when we look at these school report cards and we look at student progress, my question is, do we have any data about where the growth is coming from across our district? So is the growth, say if we're looking at the bottom 25% of our district, is that growth occurring at the bottom, or are we growing kind of on those middle numbers? Do we keep those data points?
Yeah, we disaggregate in a lot of ways, and this is an important question because this becomes a key factor, on the current student progress model, but it's going to be equally important on the new student progress model. And as part of that shift that we've been looking at here towards that new student progress model, we've been preparing reports that show the growth of students during the year by their prior achievement level. So looking at students who come to us that exceeds expectations or meets expectations or approaches expectations or does not meet expectations. Those are our 4 levels of scores on SC Ready. And we look at there is what is their student progress during the year. And what we tend to find, and I got to make sure this part's very clear, what we tend to see is our students who are coming to us at meets and exceeds expectations are growing at rates that are far beyond what similar scoring students are growing at during the year. So again, our students who are coming to us at meets and exceeds expectations are growing at rates that well exceed the scores, the growth rates of similar scoring students. So they're outgrowing their peers nationally and statewide. Phenomenal results there. And where we've continued to see issues, and this is a trend we've been looking at for a while now, is that growth of our students who are not already meeting the expectations, specifically our students that lowest achievement level of does not meet expectations, and their progress. And that is a continued area of emphasis, is what are we doing to meet the needs of those students? Identifying those students up front, identifying what are their needs, what are their strengths, how do we build on those strengths? But we don't, you assume that student progress score, and you can see it for a specific school, you assume it's, even growth throughout a school. And that's not typically what we see. We see kind of an uneven distribution of that growth and what it looks like. I will say, as we continue to prepare for the shift to the new student progress model, that's going to be an area of emphasis and an area of analysis. And we do want to continue to learn more about that and study that trend to make sure we're understanding exactly how our students are growing and progressing, and to ensure that our students who are coming to us at the lowest achievement levels are growing at the same rates as our highest achieving students. Got into that one?
That does. Thank you very much.
If it's okay, I have a follow-up from Ms. Huddle. You said there was a school went from 41 to 39?
Chapin Elementary.
This year.
Yeah, I thought it was a 41-22 and then went to a 39.
And I will check. I think I had them at, 39 is the current overall
Right.
points. I believe last year they were at 58 in 2022. At the good, when they scored good.
Okay.
In 2022.
I
We'll
thought
go
it
back and
was-
check my notes though.
Yeah, I could be wrong.
I apologize. That was not what I had down, because I took a look specifically at theirs. And the area, of course, one of the other factors here is last year they had the ML progress factored in, and then this year did not have ML progress factored in. The other key factor there was their student progress dipped significantly. Last year they got 14 points there, and this year it dipped to 2, less than 3.
Okay. Any more questions? Thank you, Dr. Holden.
Okay.
All right. As we said in our kickoff, it's about the growing season. And this is our opportunity to really create the conditions that creates this growth. And we're very proud of that continual growth. And so we do that through the strategic plan. This is how you move a group forward. We have a vision, we have a mission, and we have our goals, 4 goals. And we're going to talk about that later on tonight as the board looks to work on board policy AE. But we also have strategies. We talked about the 26 strategies under each of these strategies are action steps. We as a district move over 150-something action steps, and these are our measurables. So we're going to have Dr. Holden go through how do we do progress monitoring, how do we set these SMART goals with these action steps. Again, there are over 150 of them. We're not going to go through all 150 tonight. We may highlight
I have
some.
time. I'm ready.
Dr. Holden is willing to go through all 155 if you would like him to. But if you could, as you go through, I know things like bullying or special education, if you wanted to highlight some of those. But this is in-depth what our teams are working on. And this is how you move an organization of 2,700 people forward through these action steps and in these measurable plans. So, Dr. Holden, if you can go through, how do we progress monitor our strategic plan?
Yeah. So that's kind of what we're the next area of focus, and I think it ties in well to what we just talked about with the school report card ratings. Because as Dr. Ross mentioned, we're talking about a district of some size, one of the larger districts in the state of South Carolina. And how do we move an organization this size with this many students? How do we move it forward towards goals? How do we set those goals? And then ultimately, how do we check to see how we're doing? What I'm going to talk about first is kind of a review of our strategic planning process and how we got here. And then we're going to talk about the implementation, okay? This is something which, unfortunately, every year I get to come back and talk in the spring about this. But this is actually a great time to come back and talk about this strategic planning. And I will tell you, this is one of the areas of the district where I've been the most proud of. It's one of the areas I oversee, but it's in lead. But the amount of progress we've made in strategic planning from the district and the school level over the last few years has really been something that I've taken a lot of pride in terms of our ability to think strategically and our ability to focus our work around key goals, key ideas, and a common mission and vision. Our strategic planning process, to simplify it, really comes down to 5 elements. First, we start with using data and input to set a vision and mission, to determine strengths and identify needs. We then set goals and develop strategies to build on the strengths and address needs. We develop action steps that feed into the strategies. We implement those action steps. We progress monitor on the action steps and reflect, and then we revise. We go right back to the development and implementation phase. Constantly thinking about what are we doing? Is it working? Is it having the desired impact on our schools, on our students? Is it moving our district in the right direction? Our comprehensive needs assessment, which is required as part of this process, actually began a couple years ago. In the spring and summer of 2021, we were closing out our previous 5-year plan and beginning the 22, 23 to 2026, 27 strategic plans. So we did a comprehensive needs assessment at that time. Okay, that involved 69 parents and students and staff members, or not students, I'm sorry, parents and staff members and teachers and administrators, community members from around the district, looking at key issues in the areas of student achievement, school climate, teacher administrator qualities, and gifted and talented. During that needs assessment process, we identified strengths and opportunities for improvement, and we drafted goals. We brought those before the board at the conclusion of that process. And we also identified a few strategies, because as a key part of that needs assessment, we didn't just identify the outcomes that we were looking at, but we tried to identify underlying issues that we were seeing throughout the system and in specific schools. During that process, stakeholders were engaged through meetings, there were discussions, there were surveys. Input from those meetings and surveys was used to inform the revisions to the district's vision and mission statement, and ultimately to inform those goals. We set goals on school climate. You can see it's perception focused, perceptions of our teachers, of our students, and our parents on the social and physical environment. That comes from that school climate survey I mentioned earlier in the report card section. In student achievement, we're looking at growth goals. We're looking at growth in reading and growth in math in grades 2 through 8 on MAP growth. We have a graduation rate goal, and we have a college and career readiness goal. In teacher administrator quality, we focus on retention rate. We focus on satisfaction with the current working conditions, again coming from the SCDE School Climate Survey. And the last part is relevant professional development opportunities offered at their school. In gifted and talented, we have median conditional growth percentiles, again, this time towards a specific subset. students who are beginning the year at the 90th percentile or higher. We have the advanced placement passage rate. We have the proportion of students who are coded as Black or African American, Hispanic, Latino, or 2 or more races who participate in AGP, honors, AP, IB, and dual enrollment courses. So those are our goals. Each school then developed goals tied to the district goals. And I'll say this has been one of the more powerful practices that we've implemented through the new strategic planning process. Because previously, when I first came into the role, we would have every school in the district had its own set of goals in each of those areas. And what would occur is we'd have a change in administration, and the new administration comes in and tries to understand what's in this goal, and something gets lost in translation. What exactly was meant? We would have situations where the state does away with a test, or changes a test, or changes a metric, and everybody's trying to figure out, well, what do I do? And when you have 22 different schools that had plans at the time, and they're all focused on different things, how do we provide the guidance to them to find out about this specific metric? In some cases, we were using school-created metrics, okay, which as schools changed metrics or changed administrations, then continuing to implement that and find that data became a challenge. So as part of our needs assessment process, in the preliminary stages of that, we talked to principals and we talked to other personnel. And we said, what would it look like here if we were all focused on the same goals? So instead of having every school focused on different issues, what if we were all talking about the same thing, focused on the same measures, focused on the same strategies, trying to do the same work? That would allow for district-wide alignment of our resources, of our work, professional development, consistent conversations on the same topics. We know we're talking about the same thing. We don't have one school focused on only on the career readiness assessment and a different school focused on SAT scores, okay? That all lumps in together under college and career readiness. We can have a consistent conversation. And when the data points change, for example, we've had 3 or 4 different career readiness tests that were administered in the last few years. We've had ACT, we've had WIN Learning. We keep going back and forth because of various state contract issues. We can provide guidance to schools when those metrics change. Now, although every school is focused on the same ideas, their baseline data is different, so their end goals are different. So each school set their goals along a similar framework, but with a different end in mind because they're starting at different places. And the last part, and our first big progress monitoring tool, is that we don't just have a 5-year goal. If you look at the plan, we have a goal, an interim goal for every year, okay? So we took the initial round of goals and we developed those based off of how other schools in the state were performing and how other districts were performing and how we were performing in relation to those. And we set that 5-year goal, and then we simply looked at that data and tried to see what would be a reasonable progression over the course of 5 years towards that. So each year we have an interim goal. If we were to go back to the graph that Dr. Ross showed at the beginning of the superintendent's report, it showed the graduation rate goal, okay? That is the interim goal for this year. It is not the 5-year goal, okay? Just like last year, the goal that was shown was the interim goal for last year. We have an interim goal for every year, and we'll have that through 26, 27. And that's been a different process too, because schools were often confused about, and school administrators were confused about what is a reasonable goal. We saw some folks who had an SC Ready goal, and it was to increase by 2% every year. We're going to increase the percent who met or exceeded. But there was no real science behind that. How do we get to 2% per year? And in some cases, those were just goals that had been continuing on since the late 2000s. And simply we're going to increase by 2% every year, not a realistic reflection of where we had been. So this process allows us to better coach schools through that strategic planning process, and again, ensures we're all having the same conversation. We then, once we had our goals and our mission and our vision, we then assembled teams of parents and at this point students. We did bring in staff members and teachers and administrators and community to identify strategies related to those goals that would support our work. That was done by examining the goals, examining some underlying data, having conversations about what was occurring and why, and then we brought those strategies back in December of 2021, so about 6 months after, almost exactly 6 months after the approval of the goals. That led to 6 strategies in school climate, 6 strategies in student achievement, 6 strategies in teacher administrator quality, and 8 strategies in our gifted and talented section. And again, I'm not going to go through each one of those with you, but the strategies at each school are aligned to those district strategies as well. So we have a strategy to work with our multilingual learners and address their needs. We have a strategy on working with students with disabilities and meeting their needs. each of our schools has similar areas of focus, again, allowing for those continuous conversations. So here's the timeline thus far. I'll back it up a second. We started with the mission, vision, and goal setting, spring to summer 2021. We then did strategy development, fall of 2021. I did confirm that December date was still fall 2021, because that surprised me. I don't know how the calendar works, apparently. And then action step development began after that with winter to spring 2022. And this is the phase we're in now, which is implementation, progress monitoring, reflection, and revision. We've been there since summer 2022. Now, the way that works at the district level is that each district level strategy, so that would be the 26 I just talked about, each strategy is led by one or two members of our district administration. The district administrators are responsible for implementation and revisions to the action steps during the year, and then those are really the details. That's the heart of what we're doing here. The strategies and the goals, those are big ideas and a place we're headed, but the action steps get into what exactly do we expect to see occurring. And here you can see our list of strategy leaders listed by each overall area. I've included a short, brief description of the strategy instead of listing it all out there. But you can see which district personnel lead each of those strategies as well, all the way from school climate, all the way down to gifted and talented. Okay, so what do they do? Those strategy leaders assemble a team of stakeholders: parent, guardian, staff, teacher, administrator, community member, student, okay, and bring them together. They meet during the year, typically twice. They review the strategy, they review current action steps and relevant data, and then based on that input, we make changes to our action steps, okay? We look at what action steps need to be revised, which ones should be discontinued, or what should be created to address new issues as well. That's that action step strategy process. Really, that's the details of it. Now, what should be included in an action step? Now, this is a key part of the plan. This is actually the bulk of the plan. It's about 90 pages, I think, okay, of the action steps. Each action step should have the following. We should have the activity itself, a timeline that should be specific. When is this occurring? When during the year? Is this happening monthly, quarterly? Is it on a daily basis, a weekly basis? When are the items occurring? Who is responsible at the district level? That's what you would see in the district plan. Who is responsible for leading this initiative? Okay? Who's our point of contact? We do estimated cost. We outline the funding source. Okay? And the last part is really, I'd say, the biggest challenge. This is where we're looking to grow. This has been the area of focus this year. Okay? Once we got past the writing stage, we look at this column called Evaluation Indicators of Implementation. And I will tell you that's the biggest challenge we have. Okay? Is what does success look like? Okay? We know what graduation rate is. Okay? We roughly understand that concept. We know what college and career readiness is. But those are measures you see, and we have progress monitoring tools for them during the year. But you don't ultimately get that number back until the end of the year, okay? For median conditional growth percentile, we can look at how we did in the winter, we can look at how we did in the spring. But what we really want to know is when we implement these actions during the year, how did we do, okay? And so what each strategy leader, the intention of the process here, is they develop an indicator of implementation that tells us how they are doing. How do we know this is having its desired effect? Again, I'll be upfront with you. This is our biggest area opportunity for growth. This is where we have to continue to learn and develop. What does success look like? What are we shooting for with these action steps? How do we know they're having the desired impact? Because we want the action to be successful, but most importantly, we want the action to have an impact on the overall goal for that section. We want it to do the thing we designed it to do. So if it's an action step for students with disabilities, we want to see that impact in the graduation rate for students with disabilities, or the college and career readiness of our students with disabilities, or the academic growth of our students with disabilities, okay? And this is a shift as well, because historically, what was asked for in that column would have been just the evidence. So where might you find this? They would say lesson plans, or they would say it's going to be in the unit plan or the curriculum framework. It would just list a place where the evidence might be, not necessarily what we're looking for in that evidence to tell us how we're doing, okay? And the shift now is, what are we specifically looking for in that piece of evidence to tell us how we're doing? Again, that's an area of an opportunity for growth for us. We're continuing to work on that. It's been an area of ongoing professional growth for us. I think it's a good process for us to continue to grow in. But what we look for there is, how are we monitoring that? What evidence indicates the activities being implemented? And what evidence indicates that we're making progress towards the goal? Now, if the board is so inclined, I'll be happy to go through some of those specific action steps and look at those. We can do that. Again, I just told you, this is one of the things I'm most proud of my work here in District 5. It's one thing I'm proud of our whole system, of all the schools. I could seriously do this until Friday. We could do, and I think there was an offhand comment somebody said the other day, I don't know, people don't talk about strategic planning getting excited. I said, that's a lie. I wake up every morning fired up about strategic planning. I really think this is the way we're going to see change in the school district over time. Not necessarily immediately, but over that 5 years, we'll see it. So I'm happy to go through any one of those actions with you. But our big process, again, is we take that data, we use it to inform our mission, vision, goals. We then set those goals and strategies, those big ideas of where we're headed. And then we get into the concrete work of those action steps. We progress monitor as we implement. We try to reflect and revise those things. Again, I will tell you, and many times we implement an action step and it fails. Okay, that happens just like a teacher implements a lesson and it doesn't go the way we thought it was going to go. That's part of the process. That's part of how we learn and grow as professionals. That's how we develop. If it was going to work and we knew it was going to work, we'd do that all along. But circumstances change, ideas change, and we have to make attempts to try something that's ultimately going to disrupt what I laid out earlier, which is that trend that we've seen, which is our highest achieving students are growing at the highest rates compared to similar scoring peers nationwide, and our lowest achieving students, our students coming to us with those lowest achievement levels, are not growing. How are we going to disrupt that? It's going to be through looking at the research, looking at what it tells us to do, trying something new, and then ultimately reflecting on that success. And Ms. Huddle brought up those survey points, right? Those are key things we do need to look at. And then we need to hear from teachers about what's working. And I hope that in some ways through our strategy process, where we have a strategy on school-wide expectations or a strategy on building, all these strategies on school climate, we're hearing from folks and hearing what are some of those things that are fueling those response rates to make sure that we are addressing the needs of what our folks are saying. At this point, I'll turn it back over to Dr. Ross, and then I'll do any questions the group may have.
We stand for any questions.
Any questions? Mr. Hogan?
Dr. Holden, how does it feel to be the smartest person in the room?
Here's what I'll say. I hope that I say it in a way, I hope I say this stuff in a way that everybody understands. And I do happen to believe I'm usually very smart, but if I say stuff in a way that doesn't get across to everybody, then I'm not very smart at all, and it doesn't do anybody any good.
Excellent, excellent presentation. I have no questions. I just wanted to say thank you very much.
We have the jokester right here. Mr. Satterfield.
Yeah, I do want to echo what Mr. Hogan just said. And I appreciate your clarity there, because we talked about some of those issues in our meeting a couple weeks ago about how are we going to measure our success. Yeah. And when you have so many goals and you have so many strategies, it can be a difficult process. It really can. But you did a really great job of explaining that. I did have one question, and I guess this is something that deals with, what's going on currently. You talked about percentages of feedback on surveys from parents. How do we do with that? Yeah. And does it vary cluster to cluster?
Absolutely does. I will say a survey, the parent surveys don't count as part of the overall rating for this exact reason, because parent engagement with the survey does vary wildly from year to year. Now, we were very lucky this year, and this came up at a board meeting, where we saw a higher number of parent responses this year than we did in the previous year. You will likely recall this. They used to do this, the parent surveys used to go home on paper, and we would bring them back. So we knew, while the survey results are anonymous, we know we've received one or not received one. When I was a principal, again, the surveys are anonymous, we would incentivize students. If we get your survey back, we're going to give you a treat today, or at the end of this process, because we want to make sure we get as many surveys back as possible. Again, keeping the results anonymous. But the way the system is set up now, we have no way to know which parents have completed or not completed. We see an overall number. We can see that thousands of parents have completed, but we don't know who to send a targeted reminder to. And sometimes that targeted reminder is what's helpful. Because in general, those massive email blasts that go out that just say, please complete the survey, they don't tell you that you haven't completed the survey or remind you that you haven't. So we do see it vary by cluster. I think that goes to one of Ms. Huddle's points earlier as well, which is a survey data is one point of data, but sometimes it's about those additional conversations and following up to say, so we said we see these trends here with a lower level of satisfaction on a given indicator. So tell us more about that. Tell us more about what you're perceiving so we can better build these action steps to address those concerns so we can ultimately see that change over time. But I will say, yeah, the parent survey results do tend to vary by school and vary by cluster. And we've seen that for years now with the survey data. And when you have a low response rate, especially among parents, just like I talked about with one cohort having a massive influence on a school's overall rating, when we don't have strong parent engagement through those surveys, a few parents do greatly swing it positively or negatively. And we want to make sure we have as valid results as possible to get as many responses as possible. We were fortunate last year. We did have a large number of responses. We'd like to see that continue to go up. I do worry that accessibility, because it's hard to access, even for me, our department oversees the administration of that survey. And even for me, knowing exactly where to go to access my student surveys, it's not the most intuitive process. So we're continuing to work with folks on that part of that process and communicate ways we could better streamline that.
Are we tied to giving the parents an online site to go and they fill out and the reason I was asking is I know that Dr. Ross is trying to work up this link and this app for communication, and if we could somehow tie that so that parents would have, they would get at least feel like they had more access to it. That might help our numbers, and from your experience, a lot of times it's the schools that you really want the most feedback from that you get the fewest responses.
Yeah. And I think part of it, I'll answer this two ways. Part of it comes down to learning better as a system about how do parents want to be communicated with, and what avenues. Every parent wants to be involved in their child's education. So finding that way to engage them, how do they want to communicate with us is a key part of this. And I think over time, we'll likely see those things become action steps as well. How do we ensure the ways we're trying to receive information are responsive to the ways that our community wants to communicate with us? One of the challenges here is through the student's parent or the parent's parent portal account. That's how they access these surveys. So then we're limited to parents who have a parent portal account and then who go in and access it through this e-collect system. That is the only way to do it other than a QR code. You can scan a QR code, but it has to be linked to your individual child because they're trying to ensure they don't receive more than one response per family. So then it is tied to a sign-on. Now, if it does go through a one-app process there, it helps us too. Of course, I think Parent Portal would hopefully be involved in that conversation at some point. But until such time as it is, then there would still have to be that separate login through Parent Portal to make that happen.
Any more questions? That was very thorough. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I do have a question, and it may just be like the way that the strategic plan is presented to us. And I'm just going to look at one of these strategies where it says we're going to implement a math course for a pathway to accelerated math. And then it talks about the timeline and who's in charge, how much money it'll cost, where that money comes from, and then the evaluation indicators, that it will be completed within the 22-23 school year. I'm just looking at one, it's random. There's no rhyme or reason to this.
Okay.
The reason why I'm looking at it is when it is accomplished, is there another column that says this has been accomplished, check, or this hasn't been accomplished?
So that is a great question.
Okay.
So one of our next parts of that process, okay, because 22-23 was our first year of implementation of the new plan, our first year of really looking at those indicators of implementation, and we're going to what the state has asked us to do there as opposed to just listing potential evidence. So one is making sure we gather that evidence during the year. Two is, did we reach those goals? And three, if we did, do we need to revise the goal within that action step to increase the difficulty or increase the target there? So we don't currently have that built in, okay? But that is something we're looking at is what's our repository for the data itself, okay? Where is that kept? And then how do we know that it was accomplished or not accomplished? Currently that relies exclusively on the strategy leads, okay? They're the ones who collect that information and house that information. We're always looking at that piece of it. Ultimately, do we know right now, the way we're currently set up, and again, being the relative infancy of this strategic plan, I would then go to that person and say, do we have this data point? If so, how do we do on this metric? But that'll be something we have to continue to look at. So we don't have a central repository or warehouse for each piece of evidence and how we did, but that is a piece that we are certainly looking at, especially as we grow with the plan, and continue to improve our proficiency in setting what those individual indicators would be.
Okay.
Thank you. Good question. Great questions by everybody. I appreciate your engagement with the topic.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Holden. As Nick Saban says, we trust the process. Thank you for outlining the process. We'll continue to follow it. Just notice as school leaders, this is 155 action steps of the district. Each principal has also identified needs on the ground that will add to the 155. So it gets, by the time you get to the classroom and the individual lesson plans, and it starts to expand by the time you get to that teacher level. So we really thank you for going through this process with us as these are the ingredients on the ground of the growing season. So just as exciting as strategic planning, we're going to move into the monthly financials. We're going to have our CFO, soon to be currently Ms. Paul Wilkerson, come forth with our monthly financials for August.
Thank you, Dr. Ross. Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. Thank you for inviting me here today to discuss and present the monthly financial report for August, ending August 31st, 2023. We'll start with the revenue. Thank you. We'll start with the revenue report. So on your screen, you will see the monthly revenue report through August 31st, 2023. Overall budget, as y'all will recall, is roughly $232 million. Year to date through August, the revenues collected were about $19.7 million, which is about 8.5% of the total budget. Looking at our local sources first, which is about 36% of our total budget. Overall, really in line from a property tax standpoint. Of course, the majority of our property tax collections are in the months of January and February. So right now, we're really just looking at those personal property taxes that have come in. The millage increase was printed on the real estate property tax bills that came out recently. And then starting January 2024, you'll notice that increase on the personal property tax bills as well. Medicaid reimbursement, it does look like we're a little short based on last year, but just keep in mind that does come in quarterly. So I'll look this up. It actually just came September 1st instead of August 31st, as it did last year. Another strong area is, of course, interest on our investments. So again, with interest rates being as high as they are, we have certainly seen an increase in our revenues in that area. So overall, local sources about $3.9 million year to date. Looking at our state sources, again, pretty much in line with where we were last year. So at this point, we're a little over 16% through the year. And if you look at our retiree health insurance and state aided classrooms, state aid is certainly in line with where we budgeted. Retiree health insurance is a little bit short, but just remember that they will make an adjustment in January to our 2023 audited payroll numbers, and so that we do expect that to increase. So that $7 million that we budgeted is still certainly in line with what we expect to see through the full fiscal year. But again, overall, about $19.7 million collected through the month of August, which is about 8.5% of our total budgeted revenue, which again is in line with where we were at this time last year. On our expenditure side, similar to our revenues, definitely in line with where we were at this point of the year last year. Overall, about $17.4 million expended through the month of August 31st, 2023, which is about 7.5% of total budget. Keep in mind, 190-day and less day employees were paid for the first time in this fiscal year on August 31st. So expect the instructional budget to certainly increase going forward. Contractual services and supplies are in line with the same time as last year. And through August, still certainly operating in the black, but we will start seeing expenditures exceed revenues starting in the month of September and continuing and through December. So this is, that time of the year where we're certainly checking our cash flow and making sure that everything is in line until we get some of those larger reimbursements coming in on the revenue side. I'll be glad to take any questions.
Any questions? Ms. Huddle?
I was looking at the details and had a couple of questions. One is, for purchase services, the number under the board of directors is pretty high, and I think that's mainly legal services, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes,
And I
ma'am.
was just curious, we we looked at those, I think, last time, the expenses, and I was just kind of curious, are they, it looks like they're all charged to the board versus split out, and I was just wondering why, and is that just like a standard thing that all school districts do?
I would have to check with other school districts. I'm not sure if it's necessarily standard, but that is how that we have always charged it historically. It's just always hit that one account.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, if you don't, I'd just be curious because, everyone thinks we control that. And it's like, oh, the board, you guys spent $500,000. Well, no, the district. And then the other question I had is, where does SEL, like we approved that, I think it was $417,000. Where exactly will that show up?
That's actually ESSER funded, so
Okay.
that is not in the general fund at all
Okay.
currently.
In SEL funds that we spend out in the operational, where would that show up?
Do you have like an example?
No.
I'm not sure. It could be in pupil activity, but if it is something that's truly in the general fund, it would show up in that purchase services.
Okay.
So I'm just not sure, depending on the program or the vendor, where it would be.
Where it would
But certainly, if it's anything that's funded out of the general fund would show up in that purchase services.
Okay,
And
thank
it'll be
you.
under, any of probably those first few pages. Yes, ma'am.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Paul.
Madam Chair, members of the board, that completes our superintendent's report, and we stand for any questions.
All right, any questions for the very lengthy superintendent's report tonight? No? All right. Thank you very much to you and your staff for preparing that.